Cedric Coward has spent his college career in the Inland Northwest. Why not run it back one more year, this time in Spokane with the Zags?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, the Zags are the best development program in college basketball. We're going to tell you why, what we learned about that. We're also going to talk about a pair of transfer portal targets for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs, starting with a player who just finished up a season very close by in Pullman, Washington, Cedric Coward. I will talk a little bit about Cedric Coward here. He's a 6'6" wing, originally from Fresno, California. He actually began his college basketball career at the D3 level at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, literally the backyard of my grandma's house. Fun fact for you all there. 1 year at Willamette at the D3 level, then he transferred to Eastern Washington. He spent 2 years at Eastern Washington and then played last year at Washington State. That year at Willamette does count against him eligibility-wise. It's only junior college years that are being removed from counting against you, at least temporarily. But because Coward only played 6 games last year, he is going to likely get a medical redshirt and have an extra year of eligibility. We'll get to that in just a second. But he goes to Eastern Washington, ends up in Cheney, playing for Coach David Riley in the 22-23 season, where he was teammates with current Zag forward Steele Venters. In 34 games, Coward started just 2 of them, played about 21 and a half minutes per game in his first year of D1 ball, averaged about 7 points, 5.5 rebounds, about 2 assists, was unbelievably efficient on 2-point. I thought Basketball Reference was lying to me when I looked at his stats. He shot 77.4% on 2-point shots his first year at Eastern Washington. 77.5%. Yeah, the volume wasn't super high because he was, mostly coming off the bench in that season, but that's still absurd. In your first year of D1 basketball, even in the Big Sky, 77% on 2s is insane. He also, for good measure, shot 39.5% from 3, which was 13 of 33. So not a huge volume in that first season at Eastern, but still not nothing either. Again, teammates with Steele Venters that year. Steele ends up coming to Gonzaga the next year and sitting out for the first of 2 straight seasons, unfortunately for Venters. And Coward broke out in his second season at Eastern Washington in 23-24. He was a full-time starter, played about 30 and a half minutes per game, averaged 15 and a half points, 6.7 boards, 1.7 assists, 1 steal. The percentage dropped, but it was still incredibly good, 69% on 2-pointers, and the 3-point percentage was also great, 38.3%. That was on over 4 attempts per game, so a high volume of 3-point shots, and he converted about 39% of the time. He also took 6 2-point attempts per game and converted them 69% of the time. So once again, just one of the most efficient offensive players in all of college basketball the last couple of years. For good measure, why not tack it on there? 89.5% from the free throw line as well on just under 3 attempts per game. He was all Big Sky first team. He led the conference in effective field goal percentage. He led the conference in true shooting percentage. He is first all time in the history of the Big Sky in 2-point field goal percentage. The highest 2-point field goal percentage mark in the entire conference history, 72.1% between those 2 seasons. Not a whole lot else you can really add to say about Cedric Coward's time at Eastern Washington. Like many of his teammates, including LaJuan Watts, including Dane Erickstrup, including Ethan Price, Cedric Coward followed Coach David Riley from Eastern Washington to Pullman and Washington State as they made the transition into the WCC following the explosion of the old Pac-12. Coward was kind of the biggest piece in that transition. It was kind of him and LaJuan Watts were the 2 that got the majority of the attention in terms of like, hey, these are guys who could be all WCC caliber players. These are guys who could potentially be even NBA players. And in fact, Cedric Coward has been in the NBA conversation for quite a while now. And it looked like he was well on track to not only be potentially an all WCC or even WCC player of the year type player. He looked like he was well on track to be an NBA draft pick after his first 6 games in the 24-25 season, where he played 33 minutes per game. He averaged just under 18 points per game, 7 rebounds, close to 4 assists, which is a huge jump from where he was at Eastern. He also averaged 1.7 blocks per game, shot 71% on 2-pointers. Once again, the man is insanely efficient offensively around the rim. Shot 40% from 3. Unfortunately, it was just 6 games. He suffers an injury. He kept trying to come back. The hope was that he would be able to return, but unfortunately, after a while, they eventually just shut him down for the rest of the season, expecting to get that medical redshirt year back, which the expectation, there's really no reason he wouldn't get that redshirt back. So we're left with a player who dominated at Eastern Washington, who looked outstanding in a small sample size for Washington State. And while you would say, oh, well, if he was able to replicate that production at Wazoo, like that's a good sign that he could, play in the WCC. The problem is he didn't really play a lot of the better competition in his 6 games at Washington State. He played Portland State, Bradley, Idaho, Iowa, Northern Colorado, and then his alma mater, Eastern Washington. Those are the 6 games, the 6 opponents that he faced while at Washington State. Iowa being the most notable, and he had 9 points. He had 8 rebounds. He had 2 assists. He was 1 of 6 from 3. It was probably his worst game. He also wasn't very good against Idaho, 4 points, 5 blocks in that game, 4 boards and 3 assists, but again, just the 4 points. But he was magnificent in the rest of their games. 23 points, 12 rebounds against Portland State, 18 points, 7 boards against Bradley. And Bradley's a pretty good team, so don't want to knock them by any stretch. 30 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists on 12 of 18 shooting against Northern Colorado. And then a 22.9 rebound, 7 assist performance against his alma mater, Eastern Washington, in his final game before succumbing to the injury. So really good performances against some not so great teams. Would have been really great to see what he looked like in the conference. I have no doubt that he would have been great. I'm not trying to be a big skeptic, more so that we didn't get to see it. We just didn't get to see exactly how that would have translated in that league. Would he have been, as good as like a Michael Ratai from Oregon State? Would he have been an all WCC guy? I think probably, but we just never got to see it fully develop for him. And now he's in the transfer portal. He's also in the NBA draft process. Again, if he's fully healthy and he plays well if he gets an invite to the combine or the G League combine, plays well, does what he's capable of doing, there's a chance he's already done playing college basketball. There's a very real chance that he just goes pro and starts his professional career. I don't know if he's going to get drafted necessarily. There's plenty of mocks out there that already do have him on the draft boards, but without a lot of experience, without getting to see much of him last year, I think we'll see if he ends up getting drafted, but he's going through the process. In terms of other schools that are interested, we haven't seen a list come out. He hasn't released a top 5. We haven't seen a tweet from Joe Tipton or Sam Kaiser or any of those others who post this kind of stuff that says, like, here are the schools that have reached out to Cedric Coward. I'm afraid I'm jinxing myself and it's going to be out by the time the show comes out. But for now, we have not seen that list. Here's what we do know. Cedric Coward is represented by Life Sports Agency, the same sports media agency that represents both Andrew and Ryan Nembhard. So there is a distinct connection. There is a familiarity where Gonzaga's coaching staff has worked with this agency to land both Andrew and Ryan Nembhard to potentially renegotiate deals with them between their first and second seasons in Spokane. So there's familiarity there. Obviously, there's familiarity with Coward, having seen him at Eastern Washington, familiarity with being teammates with Steel Venters. Didn't get to see him on the court for Washington State last year, but certainly we're prepared for him and we're aware of him as a player. So there's definitely a lot of connections here. Worth pointing out that there's a lot of smoke that UW has put in a big old bag of money offer to Cedric Coward and that he is considering that. Again, these are just things that people are saying on social media. There's not a lot of validity to it necessarily, but it is something to keep an eye on. It's very possible that UW tries to pull him to the other side of the state. It would be tough to see a player transfer from Wazoo to UW. Not that Wazoo to Gonzaga, when they're in the same conference, would be much better necessarily, but definitely something to keep an eye on. I've also seen a lot of smoke for Illinois as well. He seems like a good fit for the Illini in terms of what Brad Underwood's team likes to do. I'm not sure if there's an actual connection there or if it's just people talking on social media, but another program to potentially keep an eye on in the Cedric Coward sweepstakes. In terms of his fit at Gonzaga, it's pretty clear. He's a 6'6" wing. He's a great rebounder. He's a great outside shooter, extremely efficient offensive player. What's not to like? What's not to like here about Cedric Coward potentially coming to Gonzaga? Where I'm curious with him is whether he could be kind of a small ball 4. He's listed at 6'6", so it's pretty small. Jalen Warley is likely going to start at the 3, and he's 6'7", so it'd be kind of odd to have a starting power forward who's a little bit smaller than Warley, but I do think Coward could play the role again. He is a good rebounder. We've seen that. The physicality is there. The toughness is there. The floor spacing would make him a nightmare matchup for opposing teams. And again, we talk about him as the 4. Braden Huff and Grant Ike are going to start at the 5 and the 4. Coward would probably start at the 3. Either Warley comes off the bench or he starts at the 2, and you just have a very kind of beefy, lengthy lineup. You could start Innocente. Obviously, there's other players that could potentially be in the mix here as well. But I do think that Coward potentially sliding up to the 4 in lineups where either Huff or Ike comes off the bench or goes to the bench. You bring, maybe Warley comes off the bench, you bring him in, you slide Coward up to the 4. Like, I think there are lineups that could absolutely work because of his skill set, because of his physicality, but he is kind of a tweener in that way. He's a career 39% 3-point shooter. He's, again, very efficient around the rim. Gonzaga's had these 3-4 hybrids before. Corey Kispert played both the 3 and the 4. There was a lot of talk about Julian Strother becoming a 3-4 hybrid. He never really played the 4, but like in snippets of time he did. But he could have. Like, I think that was a role that was available to him. Coward, I think, is a little bit more of a traditional 4, like in the sense that he's already kind of more comfortable playing that role. So I wouldn't be surprised if Gonzaga were to give him a serious look, if they considered him as a potential power forward option, because I think that could really fit him at the college level. So Cedric Coward, absolutely, unquestionably a name to keep an eye on here, especially with the connections he already has to Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. But we haven't heard any specific connection that the program has talked to Cedric Coward yet, although we expect that'll happen in the not too it probably already has happened, if we're being honest. However, we do know that Gonzaga has contacted another very athletic 6'7" sharpshooting wing out of the transfer portal. That would be Jacob Dar from Rice. We're going to talk about his potential fit in Spokane and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, witnessing those unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big sporting event live. And getting tickets, it just should not be stressful. And that's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time Picks, their curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sporting events, concerts, comedy shows, theater, and more. I just checked the Game Time app. There are amazing deals on some huge events coming up in my Portland area. I'm sure there's plenty out in the Spokane, Seattle areas as well. And their lowest price guarantee, it means that Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a better deal. Gonzaga's playing Oregon State in Corvallis for baseball on April 21st. The Zags have been rolling as of late on the diamond. Tickets are just $10 a piece in the outfield. If you're in that area, Salem, Corvallis area, want to go see some Gonzaga baseball, definitely worth checking out. Folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are moving on to our second transfer portal target of the show. We talked Cedric Coward in the first segment from Washington State, previously at Eastern Washington, previously at Willamette in Salem, Oregon. We talked about his fit in Spokane, whether that would be a logical spot for him to land. And we're now going to talk about a player who has some similarities to Coward, doesn't quite have the pedigree, but does have some of the same skills and same talent and various things like that, which I think is kind of a good indication that Gonzaga is looking for a player like Cedric Coward, because Jacob Dar, in a lot of ways, is like Cedric Coward. He's a 6'7" wing. He's originally from Omaha, Nebraska. He also began his career not at the Division I level. He was at D2 Emory and Henry before he ended up going to Rice for he spent 2 years at Emory and Henry, so then they went to Rice for his junior year, so he has 1 year of eligibility remaining. He spent the one season at Rice in the American Athletic Conference, Rice located in Houston, Texas. That was this past season. And he blossomed into a really big-time contributor for the Owls. All told, over the season, he played 30 games, started 13 of them, played about 20 minutes per night. His overall season numbers, 7.5 points, a little under 4 rebounds per game. Not a super efficient 2-point score, about 45% on twos. That was also only on about 2.5 attempts per game. But he did shoot 37% from 3. and that was on over 3 attempts per game. So he was a strong 3-point shooter, coming off the bench, playing decent minutes, 75% from the free throw line. But really, Dar's season can kind of be broken up into 2 different segments. His first 13 games and then his second 13 games. And then his last 4 games towards the end of the regular season. He was mediocre in those games. But I wanted to break up first 13, last 13. That's right around when he entered the starting lineup. And I think it gives a good indication of how long it took for him to gain the trust of the coaching staff, and then what happened when they started trusting him and unleashing him and letting him play more minutes, because the difference is striking. In the first 13 games of his Division I career at Rice, Dar averaged 3.1 points, 2.8 rebounds, and 0.2 blocks in about 11 and a half minutes per game. He was not efficient at all. 35% on 2-pointers, 29% from 3 on less than 2 attempts per game. And then in the next 13 games, Dar averaged 12.2 points, up from 3.1, 4.6 rebounds, 1.3 blocks per game in 26 and a half minutes. So his playing time more than doubled. His points per game quadrupled effectively. Rebounds were close to doubling. Blocks was 6 or 7 times more. He also shot 47% on 2-pointers. So with way more playing time and way more shot attempts, his efficiency climbed dramatically. And from a 3-point perspective, again, first 13 games, Dar shot 29%. Second 13 games, he shot 46.5%, and that was on 4.5 attempts per game. Our boy went nuclear in the second half of last season shooting the rock, 47% from 3. This dude can absolutely light it up. Like we said, 6'7" wing. He's long, he's athletic, he's rangy, he's got that outside shot. A lot of things that Gonzaga is really looking for in the transfer portal. Now, Gonzaga is nowhere close to the only school who has taken notice of Jacob Dar in the transfer portal. This is per Deshaun London, who is a recruiting analyst for 247 Sports, said, here's the list of schools that have contacted Dar so far in the transfer portal. Gonzaga is on this list alongside Memphis, Cincinnati, West Virginia, St. Bonaventure, Texas A&M, UW, Kansas State, Seton Hall, San Francisco, Minnesota, and FAU. Obviously, 2 of those schools in the American Athletic Conference alongside Rice. That would be Memphis and FAU. So they've seen quite a bit of Dar, at least a little bit of him, with only 1 season at Rice. Zags are also competing with a local team in UW. They're competing with a WCC rival in San Francisco, who just landed Guillermo Diaz-Graham from Pitt in the transfer portal about an hour before I hit the record button here. So lots of different competition here, obviously. Again, Cincinnati being in the mix, West Virginia, a couple Big 12 schools. You got A&M in the SEC, a team that needs to rebuild their entire roster. Seton Hall in the Big East. I mean, you've got Minnesota representing the Big Ten. You got every power conference here represented in terms of trying to land Jacob Dar. So going to be some serious competition. We don't really know how serious Gonzaga's pursuit of Dar is at this point. Again, reached out is such a vague statement that it's really hard to know, like, are they just checking in? Are they just asking on the price? Are they seriously invested? Like, we don't always know the scope of interest from the programs, but it's not hard to see why Gonzaga would be interested in here. They need 3-point shooting. It's not a secret. This team lost 87% of their made threes from last year. You take out, they made like 263 threes last year. 230 of them are gone between the eligibility running out for Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard and Ben Gregg and Caleb Battle. And then with Dusty Stromer hitting the transfer portal, with Michael Ajayi hitting the transfer portal, with Junsu Kyo hitting the transfer portal. That's 87% of your made threes from the worst 3-point shooting Gonzaga team in the Mark Few era, according to Ken Pom. So this team was already not good at 3-point shooting, and the few players they had that could knock them down are all gone. Braden Smith's an adequate 3-point shooter, but Jalen Warley is not. Davis Fogel's not expected to step in and be a big-time outside shooter. That's not really his game. Steele Venters, if he's healthy, is going to be a huge contributor in that space, but the health is a huge question mark for Steele right now. So adding a player who can play the 2, the 3, or even the 4, who can shoot the 3 ball is critical. It is a must-have for Gonzaga. That's why you see them going after the Rodney Rices and the Trace and Eagle staff who transferred to South Carolina. Guys who are high-level 3-point shooters. Brennan Howson, who landed at Iowa. We just saw that earlier today on Monday as I'm recording in the evening. But that's why, Tanner Toulson, we talked about on Monday's show, like that's why they're going after these guys, because they need floor spacing. A guy who shot 37%, who spent the last half of the season shooting 47% from 3, totally makes sense for the Zags. Again, he's kind of the same size as Jalen Warley, so I don't know if you'd start them both starting with the 2 and the 3, one of them being a bit more offensive, one of them being a bit more defensive. 2 6'7" guys starting on the wing alongside Braden Huff and Graham Ike would, I can almost guarantee you, be the tallest Gonzaga lineup that we've ever had. I would feel pretty confident in making that assertion, even though Braden Smith's about 6 foot. It would still be a huge starting lineup. I'd be curious if the Zags would roll that out. But yeah, I think that this is another player who fits that archetype that Gonzaga is looking for. And I think further emphasizes why Cedric Coward would be a great fit, because he has a lot of those same things going for him that a guy like Jacob Dar, who Gonzaga has already contacted, has going for him as well. Well, folks, we're going to move on from talking about the transfer portal to close out the show, talking about Gonzaga's development, their player development specifically. Long have we known that it is one of, if not the very best systems to develop as a player in college basketball. And some recent data that's over the last 10 years in college hoops proves that to be true. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, between online shopping and entertainment, it's pretty easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. My wife and I always want to make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to our finances. And thankfully, with Monarch Money, managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from talking transfer portal targets for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs to instead talk about this program's history of player development. Because a recent stat, it was posted by Cobra Stats on Twitter, and it was shared by Evan Miyakawa of evanmiya.com because it was using his data. He has a stat called Bayesian Performance Rating, and it is basically a data point comparing your offensive performance and your defensive performance, adding them up, giving you an overall data point that indicates how good you are. And it's not foolproof, but it obviously gives you a very good, easy, identifiable number of, like, this is the rankings for the transfer portal, so on and so forth. And the data was collected from 2015 until now, showing year-over-year growth for the average player in your program. And what it found was that Gonzaga's year-over-year growth for their players from one year to the next at Gonzaga grew more than any other team in college basketball. This is a pretty clear and definitive statement showing that Gonzaga's player development is the best in the country. Obviously, there are going to be some caveats if you develop a player so well that they leave for the NBA and they don't come back, et cetera, et cetera. We know that there are caveats. This kind of data is difficult to prove with any kind of absolute conviction, but as best we can for a 10-year sample size of data, Gonzaga's players have improved more than any other program in college basketball. 2 through 4, by the way, on this list behind Gonzaga: Purdue, Houston, Tennessee. Gonzaga, Purdue, Houston, Tennessee, the 4 programs with the most player development in the last decade. There are a couple of things that stand out immediately about this. One, those programs have all had consistent coaches. Since 2015, those 4 programs, 4 different coaches. Mark Few at Gonzaga, Matt Painter at Purdue, Kelvin Sampson at Houston, Rick Barnes at Tennessee. They've all been there for that entirety of that time. Number 2, if you were to make a list of the 4 most notable, most successful, most lauded coaches currently in college basketball who have yet to win a national championship, your list would almost certainly be Mark Few, Matt Painter, Kelvin Sampson, and Rick Barnes. Maybe in a different order, but that would be your list. I don't think this is a coincidence. I do think that part of it is that to have significant development, you're probably not recruiting a bunch of 5-star talent. You're not bringing in the number 1 overall recruiting class because those players play great for a year and then leave. And so they're not in the data set because they're not staying around for a second year. So I do think that there's an element of programs that grab players who maybe aren't as highly regarded and then develop them into very good players, have a ton of success, as we can say clearly with Gonzaga, Purdue, Houston, and Tennessee, but have yet to win that big one. Again, I don't think it's a coincidence, but I also don't think that it's like you're incapable of winning unless you do so-and-so. I do think that, Gonzaga's been to the championship twice. Both times they had 5-star talent on the roster. I do think it helps, but it was very quickly noticeable to me that those were the four programs that were at the top of this list. I'll point out that Kansas is also on this list, and Bill Self's a national champion. Kentucky and Villanova are on this list as well. Kentucky was actually 5th. And while their current coaches are not national champions, in the last 10 years in this data set, of course, John Calipari was at Kentucky and Jay Wright was at Villanova and won championships in this period of time. So it's not necessarily a foolproof point, but it is just something that stood out to me when looking at it. And for Gonzaga, I mean, again, we've talked about their player development at length throughout, the history of the Locked On Zags podcast. But what's so great about what Gonzaga does is they develop talent, whether it's international recruits, whether it's domestic high school recruits, whether it's transfers. Their success is not predicated on being one of those, only one of those 3 different things. International, Rui Hachimura is an incredible example. Completely unheralded freshman, barely got onto the floor. 3 years later, he's an All-American. From the domestic side, Corey Kispert, outside the top 100 in his recruiting class, not considered a high-level prospect at all. 4 years later, he's 1 pick away from being selected in the lottery of the NBA draft. And there's many more. Obviously, Adam Morrison's probably the best example in that specific space. But, Braden Huff's a recent example who's been outstanding after being a borderline top 100 prospect. Julian Strother, Stephen Gray, Matt Bolden, etc. Obviously, on the international side, Kelly Olynyk, Shemek Karnowski, Killian Tilly, Roni Turioff, Joel Ayayi. There's a ton of examples there. And even the transfer. Brandon Clark sits out a year and blossoms into one of the best bigs in all of college basketball after transferring from San Jose State. The Nemhards both had prolific careers at Gonzaga after starting elsewhere. Graham Ike has been a great player for Gonzaga after being at Wyoming. Kyle Wilcher, Jonathan Williams, Rasir Bolton. Again, players come to Gonzaga and they get better. There's just, at the end of the day, that is such a simple statement that is irrefutably true. There are very few counterexamples. Michael Ajayi, of course, is an unfortunate, very recent example, but this is so rare at Gonzaga for players to show up here and not really materialize or develop or get better from where they were. Again, you have, guys like Martinez Orlauskas or even more recently Jun Suk Yo who never really reached the potential that we thought that they had, but we don't know how much better they got. Maybe they never cracked the rotation because the other players also got better. Maybe they were just misfires by the staff. Who knows? Those things happen. Nobody's foolproof, but I'm personally not surprised at all to find out that Gonzaga is number 1 in this specific metric, because it feels like every time they land a player, there's a plan for them to be blossom into a star in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And they just seem to hit right on it every single time. And it's an extraordinarily impressive thing to watch this program go through year after year after year. Last thing I want to mention here before we get you on with your day, I mentioned Nolan Hickman getting an invitation to the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament, the Pit, which is going on later this week, starts on Wednesday. Caleb Battle has also accepted an invite, so there will be 2 Zags at the Portsmouth Invitational event this week. Nolan Hickman, Caleb Battle, former Zag Umar Ballo has also been invited and accepted, so there will be 3 former Zags at the event, 2 who were on Gonzaga's roster last year. We're also seeing Augustus Marcelonis from St. Mary's and Adama Alpha Ball from Santa Clara. Won't get into it too much, but Adama Alpha Ball was an NBA draft prospect who was invited to the NBA draft events and probably would have gotten, if not selected, signed to a 2-way contract last year. He opts to return to school, has a rough senior season for the Broncos, and is now going to the Pit, which is kind of considered a tier below the G League Combine and the NBA Draft Combine. Doesn't mean he won't find his way to those events too, but woof. That is a tough turn of events for Adama Alpha Ball, who may have had more success had he left college a year sooner than he actually did. This is a 64-player event, so we'll see lots of familiar faces. Tyson Degenhardt from Boise State is also participating as well. Gonzaga's had plenty of players who participate in the past. I think this might be the first time they've had 2 players in the same year. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I couldn't find any data that shows a multi-Zag year outside of this year with both Battle and Hickman. Rasir Bolton, the most recent player to participate from Gonzaga, he did so in 2023. All right, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to the everyday listeners. We'll be back on Wednesday. More transfer portal talk, more season in review series as we get through those and get into the off season in full. We'll also have some talk about the WNBA draft, which as I'm recording is about to get going. We'll talk about Yvonne Ejim, whether she does, whether she doesn't get drafted. We'll get to that in a future episode as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, go Zags.